I wasn't fully awake when the screaming started. My sister's voice came first, sharp, familiar, cutting through the haze before my eyes could open all the way. My body felt heavy, my mouth dry, my ribs aching with every breath. The lights above me blurred, humming in a way that made it impossible to tell if it was morning or night. Only that something was wrong before I even moved. Lauren stood at the edge of my bed like she was inspecting damage on a car she didn't plan to fix. "You totaled your rig," for what she said. Her voice half amusement, half accusation. "A few bruises and a limp, you always did overreact." My mother, Diane, didn't look up from her phone when she muttered, "She loves a good performance. Don't ruin it for her." Their laughter felt rehearsed, like an old family joke I had never been in on. I tried to swallow, but the dryness in my throat turned the motion into pain. I stayed still because movement would have meant acknowledging them, and I had learned silence was safer. Lauren leaned closer, her perfume sharp and artificial, saying, "That beeping is annoying. You don't need all this anyway." "Right. You've been faking sick since high school." Before I understood what she was doing, her hand reached out and yanked the monitor cord free. The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt like a door closing. The nurse appeared almost instantly, her face calm, but her eyes fixed on Lauren. "Step away from the bed," she said in a voice that didn't rise. Diane started to protest. "She's family." We were just, but the nurse interrupted. "You're not leaving. I've called security." Lauren's smirk faltered, replaced by the first flicker of fear I had ever seen on her face. Diane's phone slipped into her lap, the screen still glowing. The monitor came back to life, its slow beeping louder than any argument they could make. I didn't say a word. My chest hurt too much to risk it, and there was nothing left to explain. They stood frozen as footsteps echoed from the hallway, the kind that carried authority. When the officers entered, the room filled with a quiet I had never known at home, orderly, deliberate, final. Lauren tried to speak. Diane tried to charm. Both failed. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time since the crash, I realized the noise that left with them wasn't just sound, it was the weight I had mistaken for love. 2 officers entered the room. A woman in uniform leading, her expression composed but unreadable. She spoke first, asking Lauren to step back from the bed and hand over whatever she had unplugged. Lauren's voice tried for charm as she said, "It was a misunderstanding. I just wanted to stop that noise." But the words came out thinner than she meant them to. Diane added quickly, "We're her family. We know what's best for her." As if the word family could undo what they'd already done. The female officer turned to me, her tone even. "Do you feel safe with them here?" she asked. And I didn't answer. I stared at the blank space on the monitor where the pulse line had vanished only minutes ago. She didn't push. She simply nodded once and told the nurse to document everything. The second officer stepped closer to Lauren, saying, "Ma'am, you need to wait outside while we take statements." Lauren's confidence started to fray as she crossed her arms and said, "You're blowing this out of proportion." "She's fine. Look at her." Diane's voice cracked into defense. "My daughter isn't pressing charges." "Are you—" "Elena," I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid, but because their words no longer required answers. The female officer gestured toward the hallway and said calmly, "You're being detained for questioning on interference with medical equipment." The sound of her pen scratching against a notepad filled the space between us like punctuation. When they finally left, the air in the room changed. The quiet felt heavier but cleaner, like something toxic had been removed. The nurse reattached the last wire, her movements efficient, her silence almost protective. I could hear the rhythmic beeping again. Steady, mechanical, reminding me that machines, at least, did what they were meant to do. I watched the red line flicker back to life and thought how strange it was that the simplest sound in the room now meant everything. Doctor. Connor Westlake came in later that afternoon. His voice calm but deliberate as he said, "Elena, I need to clarify a few things about what happened while you were unconscious." He pulled a chair closer, explaining that Lauren had attempted to access my medical chart twice, using the term family emergency authorization. When that failed, she tried again, claiming to be my primary emergency contact, but the system flagged the attempt. Your mother also spoke to several nurses. He continued, telling them you exaggerate symptoms and have a history of attention-seeking behavior. I listened without interrupting, my hand gripping the blanket until it felt like part of me. He went on. We reviewed surveillance footage. Your sister was seen arguing with staff, and your mother mocked your breathing behind their backs. It's all documented, I asked quietly. So this wasn't just a misunderstanding, and he shook his head once, saying, "No. It's a pattern of interference that violates hospital protocol." The steadiness in his tone only made the words hit harder. Not as accusation, but as fact carved into record. He told me there were witness statements, time-stamped reports, and a full incident file being forwarded to hospital administration. You have the right to file a formal complaint, he said. Watching my face for reaction, I asked, would it change anything? And he answered, it will protect you if this continues. The conversation was measured, almost clinical, but the weight beneath it carried something closer to disbelief that family could appear in reports meant for offenders. When he left, the room stayed still except for the sound of my breathing syncing with the machine beside me. I stared at the lines on the monitor, tracing each beat of my heart, thinking how strange it was that paper and screens now knew more truth about my family than I ever had. That night, the nurse returned my phone, its screen cracked but still glowing with missed calls. The first message came from Lauren, her tone brittle through text. I can't believe you let them arrest us. Call me before this gets worse. Then another, you're ruining everything. Elena, you always take things too far. A few minutes later, Diane's name appeared with a calmness that made it worse. We didn't mean for it to go that far. Stop making this public. You're hurting the family. By midnight, the messages kept coming, alternating between rage and guilt like a rhythm they couldn't control. Lauren wrote, You made Mom cry again. You should be ashamed. Followed by, Don't forget I still have things in your apartment. Diane tried softer tactics. Let's just talk. I'll bring your favorite soup. Then, no one needs to know what happened. We can fix this. I didn't reply to any of them. Only watched the bubbles of unread words stack higher until the phone felt heavier than my cast. Near 3 in the morning, my Aunt Janet called, her voice already trembling before I said hello. Elena, I just heard something. She whispered. Your mother says you set them up, that you're unstable. I told her quietly. If I hadn't been protected, you'd be hearing about a funeral, not a hospital bed, she gasped. Then said, Oh my God, in a tone that wasn't disbelief but recognition. The kind that comes when denial finally cracks. The silence that followed between us felt longer than the call itself. I turned the phone face down on the tray, letting it vibrate against the metal while their names kept lighting the screen. The sound of the monitor behind me filled the gaps they left. Steady and indifferent, I lay there listening, counting each tone as proof that I was still here, and that distance, for once, might be safer than forgiveness. When I came home, the quiet felt staged, like the air was pretending nothing had happened. The blinds were half open. Dust lined the counter where no one else should have been. The voicemail light blinked red, and when I pressed play, my landlord's voice filled the room. Elena, a woman called earlier, said she was your sister and needed a spare key. I told her no. but she kept insisting. He paused before adding, "You might want to change your locks." By evening, the locksmith finished. His tone polite but curious when he said, "Break-in or bad roommate," I answered. "Family trouble." And that was enough to stop his questions. The new locks clicked with a sound I didn't know I needed. I checked every door twice before turning off the light. The kind of ritual you learn when trust stops belonging to people and shifts to metal. The first bang came just after midnight. A hard thud that rattled the door frame. Lauren's voice followed, sharp and impatient. "Elena, open up. We're not doing this again." Diane's tone came softer but heavier. "Sweetheart, we just want to talk. Don't make it worse." I stood in the hallway gripping my phone, saying nothing, while the pounding came again. Closer this time, like they were testing how far I'd bend. I finally answered through the door. "You need to leave." Lauren laughed. "You called the cops last time. Remember how that went? You really want more drama?" Diane's voice broke through hers. Desperate and rehearsed. "You're scaring me." "Elena, please just talk to us," I said only. "You should be scared of what you've already done." The silence that followed was quick but deep. The kind that fills itself before sirens arrive. When the police lights flashed across the window, they stepped back like the glow itself burned. The officer's voice outside was calm, instructing them to move along. Lauren muttered something about just checking in. And Diane tried. "She's confused." "Officer, we're family." The reply was final. "Not tonight, you're not." They left. And I sat on the floor with the phone still in my hand, counting the new lock clicks like they were proof I had finally drawn a line. The next morning I woke to the sound of an email alert. A small chime that didn't belong in a room that still smelled like last night's fear. On the screen was a message from my insurance provider titled, "Confirmation of Beneficiary Change." I read it twice before I understood what it said: that someone had tried to replace my name with Diane's as the primary recipient. My chest went cold. The kind of cold that doesn't fade when you breathe. I drove to my Uncle Thomas's house and handed him the phone without a word. He scrolled through the email, his jaw tightening as he said, "This isn't a mistake. Elena, this is identity fraud." My Aunt Linda leaned in behind him, her voice steady but low. "When was the last time you told them about this policy?" I told her. 2 years ago. Over dinner. They laughed about what they'd do if I died. Thomas looked at me and said, then they remembered. He called his contact at the insurance company while I sat at the table, listening to his side of the conversation. "Yes. We have documentation." "Yes. The signature was forged." "No." The client was not notified. When he hung up, he turned to me and said, "We'll file a report with the state's fraud division and get you a restraining order. You're not dealing with family issues anymore. This is criminal." Linda started pulling a notepad closer, writing down account numbers and dates as if organizing the chaos could shrink it. I watched them both move with a precision that felt foreign after weeks of panic. The hum of their conversation and the clicking of a pen sounded almost safe. When Thomas finally looked up and said, "We'll protect everything tied to your name," I nodded. Not because I believed safety would come easily, but because it was the first time anyone had said it like a promise instead of advice. They arrived before sunset, the sound of their car too familiar to mistake. Lauren walked in first, her heels striking the floor like punctuation. "You think hiding in Boulder makes you right," she said, throwing a folder onto the table. "You're destroying this family's reputation." Diane followed with a sigh, her voice trembling with false exhaustion. "Thomas." "She's confused. You know how emotional she gets. We can handle this privately." My uncle stayed seated, his tone measured as he said, "If either of you had handled anything privately, she might still trust you." Lauren snapped, You're listening to her now. She's manipulating you like she's done her whole life. Thomas looked up at her, unflinching. What she did was survive you, he said. Then added, and I've already spoken to the board about freezing your access to the family account. Diane's expression hardened. You can't cut us out of our own inheritance. Linda answered for him, her words sharp as glass. You already did that yourselves when you tried to rewrite her insurance file. The silence after that felt like confession. Lauren pointed at me, her voice rising. You wanted this. You've always wanted to make us look bad. I said quietly. You did that without my help. Diane tried one last plea. Elena, I am your mother. Don't do this to me. I met her eyes and said, you stopped being my mother the moment you tried to profit from my death. She flinched but recovered fast, whispering, you don't mean that. I said, I do. And I have every document to prove it. Thomas stood then, his voice calm but absolute. If one more threat leaves either of your mouths, I'll have an injunction filed before morning. For the first time, neither of them spoke. Lauren's face drained of color, her mouth a hard line she couldn't hold steady. Diane reached for the folder she'd thrown earlier, but Thomas blocked her with a look that ended the conversation. Linda stepped between us, saying quietly, you should go now. The phrase landed like a verdict. They hesitated long enough to understand it wasn't a suggestion. As they turned for the door, Lauren muttered, you'll regret this, I said. No, I already did. For years. The door closed behind them, and the sound of their car fading down the street felt cleaner than silence, like a house exhaling after holding its breath too long. The following week, I moved into a small apartment in Fort Collins. Its walls thin, but its silence intact. Thomas and Linda helped carry in boxes, careful not to ask about the past. Linda smiled when she set down a kettle on the counter and said, it's not much, but it's yours. I nodded, answering, that's the point. The air inside felt new, untouched by the noise that used to follow my name. Days blurred into quiet routines. I worked remote shifts for the emergency service. Long hours, but steady ones. Sometimes Thomas would call just to say, everything's settled. The restraining order is in effect. Linda visited with groceries, saying, you're starting to look less tired. I told her. Sleep feels different when no one's waiting to break the door down. She laughed softly. The kind of laugh that didn't need to fill silence, it honored it. One evening, we sat on my balcony, the sun folding itself behind the mountains. Linda poured tea and asked, do you feel happy? I thought for a moment before saying, I don't know if happy is the word. I just feel like myself again. She nodded, setting her cup down carefully. That's close enough, she said. And it sounded like permission to stop chasing closure. We stayed there without talking for a long time. The quiet working harder than any apology I'd ever received. When they left, I walked through each room once more. The locks gleamed. The air was steady. And nothing inside asked for forgiveness. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and watched the sky fade to dark. The absence of fear was almost loud. For the first time in years, I let it stay that way. I am Elena Marie Grant, and peace no longer feels like running. It feels like coming home. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to leave a place to find peace, remember that healing isn't a miracle, it's a choice. I hope my words remind you that survival can sound quiet and still mean strength. Subscribe to stay for stories that begin where fear ends.